is to hear from the fantastic Poggy Murray Whitham. Poggy, over to you.
Thank you very much, and well done on pronouncing my name correctly as well. It's a relatively straightforward name, but you'd be amazed how many people mispronounce it.
I get
Uh,
it with mine, so I always try and get it right.
Thank you very much, Matt and Claire, and the whole team at Pride and Leadership and all of the different associated organisations. It's really great to be here. Just looking through where people are from as well, there's people from all over the place, which is amazing to see. I saw somebody from Albuquerque in New Mexico. I might be visiting there to speak at something later this year, so that could be quite interesting. So thank you again to Pride and Leadership for inviting me to speak. I'm going to be talking about equity by design, the power of inclusion moments. Obviously, this is coming from a lens of engineering and from my background, but I think the message is very, very translatable to many, many other sectors. Basically, any sector that has any form of quality control, which I would argue is most of them. This, I think, translates quite well. So before I introduce myself properly, I want to start with something quite simple. This is a photo of my husband and my dog when she had much longer hair than she does now because it's far too warm, taken up on the Long Mynd in Shropshire, which is where I live. I am from Manchester originally, but I live in Shropshire now because there's people here. It's one of those places that really makes you stop and think, and that's what I'd like for you to do at the moment. Just think of a small moment, something that happened at work that made you feel like you belonged, or that made you feel like you didn't belong. One of those two. Something that might seem small or insignificant to somebody else, but meant a lot to you. Take a few moments to bring that moment to mind. If you would like to share, you're more than welcome to in the chat, but feel free just to hold on to that as we go through this. So, my name is Poggy Murray Whitham. I started my career in engineering and manufacturing. I worked up from an entry-level position up to senior management within a global automation engineering organization. But today I work at the intersection of engineering, people, and performance. I hold a few different positions at the moment. I'm Chief Operating Officer of a company called Diversity, we're the UK's #1 DEI specific survey and data analysis platform, helping organisations understand workforce experience and build evidence-led action plans. I'm also the founder of Out Engineered, which is my own consultancy. I'm an author, best-selling author of Inclusion Moments Somehow. I sit on a number of different advisory groups for the likes of the Royal Academy of Engineering, the Engineering Council, and Engineering Professors Council. I'm an advisory member with the LGBT Foundation, and I do various other things with social value groups. I co-chair a network of LGBTQIA plus engineers across the UK, and I also co-chair the Industry Advisory Board for Women in Manufacturing. So I do a lot at the moment within the DEI space, specifically in STEM more broadly, but specifically in engineering, manufacturing, construction. But I'd like to start by taking you back to the moment when I decided to refocus my career from the technical side of engineering to the more human side of engineering where I work now. So I'll take you back to April of 2024 when I still work in the automation engineering sector. It's one of the rare times that I'm actually working down from my company's headquarters, which is in St Albans, just north of London, and I'm called into one of those dreaded "can we have a quick word" meetings by my line manager. I try to reassure myself that everything's going to be okay because, after all, I have 10 years of consistent success. I've managed to hit a 5-year target in just 1 year, and I've managed to quadruple the business in my area in under 12 months. But unfortunately, I'm not being called in to be congratulated. Instead, I'm told that my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion is a distraction. I'm told that it's making management uncomfortable, that it's limiting my career progression, and that, quite frankly, I need to stop talking about it. And that's the turning point for me. That's the moment I decide enough. I'm done with this. So I make the decision there and then to leave, but not just to leave that company, to leave the entire industry in which I'd spent over a decade building my career, because I feel I need to dedicate myself to something more meaningful. Just a year later, I was named as one of the top 100 professionals in manufacturing in the UK. I chaired a section of the Royal Academy of Engineering's annual Diversity and Inclusion Conference. I was invited to present keynote speeches and guest lectures at institutions and organisations up and down the country. And out of over 85,000 nominations, I was shortlisted with just over 100 people for a National Diversity Award for being a positive LGBT role model in engineering. And the year since then has continued to be remarkable. Which Matt talked about research in the paper that Bryden Leadership posted recently, which I would very much encourage people to read. Research is very much something that I've been interested in for a long time. On top of the other things that I'm doing, I'm actually doing a doctorate at the moment, specifically in DEI within the engineering space. I won an award for some research that I did, which some of the findings of which I'll present here. It's really an interesting space to be in, I would say. It's not the easiest of spaces to be in at the moment. But what I think was really ironic, I suppose, was that I had to leave the industry in order to be recognized by it. All of this recognition that I've had since, the multiple awards that I've won for the work that I've done, and all of this recognition has only come since I left my technical engineering career. And it's that juxtaposition being recognized and celebrated by the same industry that pushed me out that fuels what I do now. Because here's the truth. Yes, I had a good career. On paper, it was remarkable. But alongside that, I had 10 years of discrimination, isolation, and abuse, like being deliberately segregated by my team due to a disability. In November of 2023, I went over to Germany for an agricultural show called Agritechnica, and my team deliberately segregated me because I have a physical disability. When I questioned that, I was told, and I quote here, that my company shouldn't hire disabled people anyway. When I raised that with HR, I was asked what I could have done differently in order not to be discriminated against. So I then had to teach HR and compliance how to do their jobs. Like being told that my autism diagnosis makes me, again, and I quote, incompatible with the position in management. And like being told that I should have fewer rights because of my sexual orientation, which was said by my line manager at a work event. When I reached senior management, which I did at the age of 29, just to rub salt in the wind with the person who told me that I shouldn't make it into management, I'm also, by the way, a chartered manager and fellow of the Chartered Management Institute, so they're obviously talking nonsense. When I reached senior management, I became, to my knowledge, the only Black queer person working at that level in my discipline of engineering in the country. And so I carried more than just technical responsibility. I carried the burden of being the only one. And as I rose through the ranks, I found myself surviving rather than thriving in a system that just felt it wasn't designed for somebody like me. So I spent my time in automation designing systems for productivity, efficiency, and safety. And they are buzzwords, but they are also guidelines that I worked by. If a machine was underperforming, if it was inefficient, or if it was unsafe, then it had to be redesigned. And yet, whilst we as engineers were comfortable applying that engineering logic to the machines that we worked with and the technical assets that we had around us, we rarely applied it. We rarely applied that same thinking to the workplace around us. That is what didn't make sense to me. We regularly monitored those technical assets, but we didn't monitor the people behind them, even though they're just as, if not more, critical to business performance. What confused me was that why, as an automation engineer, I could log into a machine on a factory floor halfway around the world and know all of the parameters on that machine. And yet, when I or one of my colleagues burnt out and left, it came as a huge surprise. And that isn't something that's just specific to engineering. In healthcare and all other industries, in healthcare, for example, you monitor patient care, you have really, really rigid systems. And yet, when you look at the physical and mental health of some people who work in healthcare, junior doctors as an example, you've got to question why don't you treat the people who work there with the same level as you treat the patients? Engineering, construction, and manufacturing are facing some serious challenges. We're grappling with a growing skills gap. We often have outdated models of leadership that fail to innovate and fail to include. And we are facing a mental health emergency. Before I continue with this part, I do want to give a trigger warning for self-harm and suicidal ideation. If this is triggering for you, then feel free to mute or move away from the computer just for the next 3 to 4 minutes. Some of you may be familiar with the statistic that the biggest killer of men under the age of 50 in the UK is suicide. What's less well known is that those working in engineering, construction, and manufacturing are nearly 4 times as likely to die by suicide than the national average. On a masculinity in engineering piece of research that I led on, it was found that over 4 in 5 engineers, 81% in fact, reported having some form of emotional or mental health concern. And this wasn't from 10 or 20 engineers, this was from nearly 1,000. 81% with an emotional or mental health concern. And yet, less than half of those, only 2 in 5, felt comfortable talking about that with their employer. When the research was first carried out in 2019, because this was carried out periodically every 3 years, it was discovered that 1 in 5 engineers reported self-harm and suicidal ideation. When that survey was then repeated in 2022, that figure rose from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4. Now, obviously, there was something quite significant that happened between 2019 and 2022. We had the COVID-19 pandemic. And so obviously that could have been a factor in why that number rose from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4, but there was still clearly a problem beforehand. Something that, again, I didn't necessarily expect to see was what happened with people feeling comfortable talking about mental health pre and post pandemic as well. That number that I gave you of only 2 in 5 being comfortable talking with their employer about stress and depression did not change from 2019 to 2022. I thought that would. Talking about mental health became much more mainstream over the pandemic, but it had no effect on people's comfortability talking about it with their employer. And so there were some other things that came out of this. Over 70% of people, of men particularly, claimed that they were still expected to control their emotions by not showing what was perceived as a weakness, such as, crying openly or basically any emotion other than anger. There were some recommendations that came out of this. The first one of which is to create a parity of esteem between physical safety and psychological safety. Now, engineering in particular, we are pretty good at physical safety. Other than the odd person being crushed every now and again by a machine, we tend to be pretty good at physical safety. It's drilled into us from day one. And yet psychological safety isn't taken anywhere near as seriously. There were some other recommendations as well, having a personable culture to enable people to feel comfortable talking with others, increasing the dialogue on stress and depression within the workplace, and having consistent messaging to get buy-in from all employees. Now, something I want to point out here is that this research wasn't done specifically on LGBTQIA plus people within engineering. This was done across the majority. So all of these statistics that I've told you is for the majority workforce. Now, I have done some research into experiences of LGBTQIA plus people within engineering, and some other studies have been done on this. What I want you to bear in mind is that the additional pressures that LGBTQIA plus people have in engineering that we'll go through here is on top of what I've just said. So we can look at what proportion of people have experienced or witnessed discrimination in engineering. And to give a benchmark, Stonewall back in 2018 did a piece of research which showed how many people experienced discrimination within the previous year, not in an engineering specific environment. And that figure was 18%. So 18% of respondents said that they had experienced discrimination in the last year. Now, across engineering generally, there are 2 studies, one that was posted in the Chemical Engineer back in 2015 and one carried out by the Royal Academy of Engineering in 2023, and they show similar figures. So the TCE said around 20% of people had experienced discrimination in the workplace, with 40% of people having witnessed discrimination. And nearly 10 years later, those figures were very similar from the Royal Academy, 25% and 32%. When I did my research in 2023, and this was looking specifically at LGBTQIA plus experiences in my discipline of engineering, in electrical, electronic automation engineering, that figure was closer to 72%. So imagine this. So we have a situation where if you are a man under the age of 50 and you're working in the sector, you're nearly 4 times as likely to die by suicide. Add on top of that, that nearly 3 in 4 queer engineers who work in this space experience or witness discrimination on top of that. And we can look at the data further. We can look at how it changes when we look just at the trans community. Now, again, to give a benchmark, the CIPD back in 2021 did a piece of research that showed how many people experienced conflicts from within the trans community. Again, not in an engineering specific situation, and that figure was 55%. So quite a lot higher than the 18% that Stonewall said just a few years earlier. Within my data, looking just at the trans community and people who had experienced or witnessed discrimination in the workplace, it was 100%. Every single trans person who responded said that they had experienced or witnessed discrimination in the workplace from a work colleague. We can also look at the types of discrimination that are very prevalent, and I'm sure some of these won't be a massive surprise to people. By far and away the most common was verbal abuse at 80%, so 4 in 5 people had experienced that, down to bullying and harassment, recruitment bias, progression bias, and then even things like physical abuse, transphobia, and even blackmail. What I found particularly interesting about this was that as there was an increase in seniority, I expected the level of discrimination that people faced to decrease, but that didn't happen. Something else happened that I wasn't really expecting, and that was the type of discrimination that people faced changed as people got more senior. It became more advanced, if you like. So verbal abuse, bullying and harassment, and recruitment bias were far more common at more junior levels of seniority or age. And as age and seniority increased, the level of discrimination stayed the same, but the type of discrimination became more subtle. So things like blackmail and progression bias were much more common at more senior rates. I think there is an expectation that as you become more senior, that the challenges disappear, but that just wasn't the case. That was not true when we looked at the data. So the question that I have is, why are we designing systems like this? If we know that they're pushing people away, that they're holding people back, or that they're driving people to burnout, then why aren't we doing more about it? Because certainly in engineering, when it comes to our machines, we would never accept that level of risk. I want to give an analogy here that is engineering specific, but it is also applicable to any industry. In engineering, when it comes to risk and quality, the traditional method of maintenance is called planned or scheduled maintenance. Essentially, we inspect and replace parts at regular intervals every 3, 6, 12 months, however regularly the manufacturer recommends it. And we do this without a second thought. The most obvious example of this in a day-to-day life is getting your car serviced. You get your car serviced every 12 months or every X number of miles, but this process is disruptive, it's inefficient, it's expensive, it involves a lot of downtime. You have to take a day off work, potentially, or spend a whole day in a garage somewhere. So it's not the most optimal method of doing this. And that's why, as an industry, engineering has continued to move towards condition monitoring and predictive maintenance. Essentially, we've started embedding our systems with sensors monitoring things like pressure, temperature, and vibration, so that instead of waiting for failure, we can detect early warning signs. We can gather real-time data, we can analyze trends, and use predictive algorithms to intervene before a breakdown happens. Now, today, predictive maintenance isn't a bonus, it's a baseline. We have it in our factories, we have it in our cars, we even have it in our own homes. Those of you who have a printer at home, assuming you can get it to work at all, which is honestly a feat of engineering in itself, they will tell you when they run low on ink, for example. Your cars, assuming you have a modern car, will tell you when your tire pressure is decreasing. You know, you can even buy fridges that can order their own food. Whether that's a good idea or not, leaves to you. But the point is, these systems are intelligent, they're embedded, and more they're expected, especially in engineering. But this isn't true just of engineering, it's true of any industry that has any form of quality control process. I did a talk for the NHS recently, and we talked about how healthcare has undergone a similar evolution. There was a time when patient observations were written manually on paper charts. You know, vitals were recorded at set intervals. Deterioration depended on somebody noticing a pattern. You know, but now digital observation systems are used. Trends are available in real time. Alerts are triggered early, and this shift from manual recording to digital condition monitoring has transformed patient safety. It seems to me that condition monitoring in engineering is translatable across various different industries. It's built on the same principle, and that is prevention is more effective and far safer than reaction. So if we can design systems like this for machines, why can't we do the same for people? This is the question I keep coming back to, because so many organizations that I work with are still very much in the scheduled maintenance stage of their DEI journey. And on a good day, that can look like a typical employee engagement survey where we ask broad questions and hope to tackle the problems that happen to make it onto the radar. But it can also look like a one-to-one that isn't worth the paper it's written on. And in the course of this, people have already disengaged, they've burnt out, they've left. So what would it look like if we could apply those condition monitoring techniques to inclusion? What if we could design systems that track things like psychological safety, workload equity, career progression, and cultural climate, not just as a one-off task or a box-ticking exercise, but as a continuous integrated feedback loop? In engineering, making small incremental changes is much easier and much safer than waiting for catastrophic failure, and the same can be said of culture. If we treated inclusion with the same rigor that we do quality control or patient care or any KPI, then we'd stop seeing it as a nice to have and we could start seeing it for what it really is, which is a design challenge. And that I really think is where many organizations need to shift their thinking. We need to stop guessing and we need to start measuring. If you're not measuring what people experience, where people progress, where people leave, where talent drops out of the system, then you're relying on instinct, and instinct isn't a strategy. We wouldn't redesign a process or a production line in engineering without any data, or at least we wouldn't if we were doing it right. So why would we redesign people systems that way? The point that I'm trying to make really is that inclusion shouldn't be improvised. It should be engineered. It's not a side project. It shouldn't be reactive, and it's not just a kindness. It's something with demonstrable benefits. It's a design challenge, and we know how to build systems. Engineer or not, we know how to monitor, to modify, to iterate, and to improve because we all do this already. With any system, with any product, with any service that we offer, we already do this. And if we do it for that, we can do it for our people as well. It was this idea about us all making small incremental changes that inspired me to start writing inclusion moments. I've been involved in DEI for around 17 years now, and we often talk about policies, we talk about equality law, training, consultancy, but inclusion isn't just about rules and compliance, it's about lived experience. It's in the queue in the shop, it's in the meeting where somebody talks over you, and it's in the decision that's made about you when you're not in the room. Now, I started writing these inclusion moments because I believe that we can create space for understanding, for empathy, and for reflection through storytelling. Policy can set the stage, and data can give us headlines, but it's stories that truly connect us. These moments can create a bridge between the data and the lived reality, giving context and putting a face to issues that might otherwise seem theoretical, distant, or just ticking a box. Now, these moments might seem insignificant to a bystander, but they can make a real difference to the person experiencing them. Now, this started as a series of LinkedIn posts. I never set out to write a book, but I wrote them knowing that people would approach them in different ways as a lens to provide insight, to help people understand common barriers that they might have missed or that they may not experience themselves, as a mirror to reflect and validate their own experiences and those of others, or possibly as a toolkit to help offer practical actions that can help them be a better ally or advocate, or maybe as some part of training program. Now, I'm going to talk through some of these inclusion moments and give some reflections and actions for each one. The first inclusion moment that I ever wrote was back in February of last year, 2025. To give some context, I live in North Shropshire. That isn't the most diverse of places. According to a recent census, the number of people in my town who don't identify as white is 11 times lower than the national average, with black people specifically being 35 times lower. And it was a really simple interaction. It's something that's happened many, many times to me before and will happen many times in the future. I went into a shop to buy some food. I was the second person in the queue. The person ahead of me went to the counter, ordered an amount of goods. He was given the items, he was asked for payments, and then he left. I went to the front. I ordered items of similar value, and the first thing that the shopkeeper did was put those on the counter behind her, take payment from me first, and only then hand them over. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that what she did was malicious, but it was noticeable, and it's something that happens with me quite a lot. Now, there could have been a whole host of different reasons why that happened: age, familiarity, how I was dressed, who knows. I was dressed professionally. I had been into that place many times before, but I hadn't been served by her before. Now, in that moment, I decided to behave differently. Something I did notice is that the man in front of me left without any small talk. He left without saying thank you. He just left. So I engaged in small talk, which isn't the easiest for me to do as an autistic person, but I made the effort. I made sure to thank her before I left, and she welcomed me back. She said, I hope to see you again in the future. Now, that might have made absolutely no difference at all, but I would like to think that that small interaction, taking that moment to do something, might have made a difference, might have made her think to treat somebody else in future a little bit differently. Now, for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, I posted an update to this almost exactly a year to the day afterwards, where I went back into the same shop. I was served by the same person, and it didn't happen again. The point that I'm making here is small signals and everyday behaviors. What small signals does your workplace send about trust, about belonging, or about risk? And where might everyday behaviors be reinforcing or challenging bias without anybody specifically naming it? And this, particularly given what's happening with our community at the moment, with the trans community, with the EHRC code of practice, and even with things like various different councils across the UK banning pride displays and saying that books and stories by LGBTQ plus people aren't suitable for children, but citing the protection of children as rights as the reason why our books should be taken down is really important. Something I did recently, start a campaign called Moments of Solidarity, to ask employers and workplaces and libraries and community spaces to essentially be visible about what they're saying about queer literature in their space. And I got an amazing response for it. It was really, really incredible. And those small signals really, really matter. Another inclusion moment was about the burden of representation. Now, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people in who are listening to this who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, or a woman or a person of color or from any kind of marginalized community, at some point may have been the only one in the room of whatever uh, demographic. And I was actually sitting on raising, this was at the Royal Academy of Engineering's annual Diversity Inclusion Conference. And one of the topics that I raised on the panel was related to this idea of the burden of representation, that the responsibility that is put on people from marginalized communities to speak for their entire group, to be the diverse voice in the room, or be the poster child for their organization's DEI efforts. Now, I have very, very regularly found myself where I'm the only one in the room representing multiple identities, the only Black person, the only queer person, the only disabled person, the only open or diagnosed neurodivergent person. And I've become accustomed to that visibility, but with that visibility comes additional responsibility. You can become the go-to person for anything related to diversity or inclusion, whether it's in your job description or not. And that burden is exhausting. It can lead to diversity fatigue, where individuals can feel mentally and emotionally drained from constantly advocating for space for change, constantly being expected to educate others and navigate spaces where they are the only one. And that fatigue is only compounded for those with multiple intersecting marginalized identities. To put an engineering term here, it's really talking about a single point of failure. Where does your organization rely on just one person or one network, perhaps, to represent an entire community? And what happens to that work and all of that knowledge if that person steps back, burns out, or leaves? Inclusion work cannot sit just with one person or one ERG. And importantly, DEI labour should be formalised, it should be recognised, it should be rewarded, and it should be compensated properly. Not, oh, this needs to be done outside of work hours, at lunch, or after 5 o'clock. The work that is done in this is work that is helping your organisation, and so it should be rewarded as such. And we need to be building redundancy into this. Allies and leaders need to speak with people and speak up for people when they're not present. This one feels particularly poignant given it's Pride season at the moment. I gave a talk last year, just after Pride in London 2025, for an event that the British Tunneling Society young members were putting together. And the title of the event was Celebrating Pride, and it really made me think, can we still celebrate Pride? I'm seeing more and more brilliant person discussions about pride and stories about solidarity and community and people's personal journeys. And I love that. But particularly over the last couple of years, there has been a shift. And I think we need to be honest about the reality that we're in as a community. Because for the past couple of years now, and particularly when I wrote this last year, Pride doesn't feel like a celebration anymore. That's a personal opinion, but it feels much more like a protest than a celebration. We are seeing our rights being rolled back. We are seeing hate crime increase. We're seeing online abuse grow bolder, and with very little moderation left to stop it. We're seeing trans people being dehumanized by the press and by parliaments, with their very existence being called into question. The UK has fallen from first to 22nd or 23rd place in the ILGA Europe Rainbow Map in just over a decade, and hate crime has risen fivefold in the same period of time. We're having queer inclusion being labelled as too political, with pride events being cancelled and ERGs being defunded or silenced by lots of organisations, but particularly engineering organisations that I see. Pride began as a protest, as a refusal to accept injustice and a refusal to be silenced. And that is the energy that I think a lot of people are holding on to now. So in terms of can we still celebrate Pride? I would say yes. I think we need to. We need to celebrate what we have achieved as a community, but we also need to be honest about where we are and how much work is left to be done. We need allies more than ever, particularly ones who will speak up for us, especially when we're not in the room. We need moments of solidarity, moments of visibility, not to be hidden away or protected against. So yes, celebration and protest can coexist in my opinion, and right now I would say they need to. For anybody who has my book, Inclusion Moments, the cover of the book is this coin. So I want to talk about this. This is one by far one of the smaller chapters in my book because it was a really simple interaction, but it was one that really meant a lot. My neighbour and I went for a walk down a country lane where I live in Shropshire. She had her two dogs, and I had my dog, my golden doodle Hestia, with me. And it was a really simple thing. She reached into her pockets and said, "Oh, I found this coin the other week at home, and so I saved it for you." And for anybody who can't read that, it's a 50p coin that has "Diversity Built Britain" written on the tail side. Now, again, to give some context, I had just been nominated for a National Diversity Award, and I had found out that I'd made it through to be a finalist for a positive LGBT role model. Now, that was published in some regional press in Shropshire, where I live, and the amount of hate that I got online for that was unlike anything I'd seen before. I had people targeting me, I had threats online, I had death threats from that. I had people posting photos in blackface, and the amount of homophobia and transphobia was unbelievable. So this one moment, consider also that I'd only just moved to Shropshire. I say only just. I moved just before pandemic, so I moved and then couldn't leave the house for a while. So I didn't hadn't really had an opportunity to get to know the neighbours. But this one simple interaction said more than just "here's a coin." It said, "You belong. We're thinking about you." And that really meant a lot. It's something that was a very, very simple action for her, something she did not think about as important at all, but it's something that meant a hell of a lot to me. And that's really what this is about. It's those small inputs that have big, big impacts because they really can have a massive effect. And that's what a lot of the book really is about. It's about these small, simple, everyday moments that can have such a big impact on other people. Inclusion and allyship don't always come from grand gestures or public campaigns. They don't have to come from multi-million pound inclusion programs or partnerships with people. They can be as simple as a smile, a kind word, or in this case, a coin. You don't have to change the world to be an ally. A micro inclusion like this won't make headlines, it won't get you an award, but it can make someone's day. And often this is where real change can begin. So, in terms of actionable things, if the challenge is understanding your reality within your workplace, how exactly can you do that? This is where diversity as an organization can help because we can provide ready to launch surveys that can help remove the burden of starting from scratch. We can use AI powered analytics to identify patterns, risks, and opportunities across the workforce, across the career experience from attraction, recruitment to retention, progression, and workplace experience in general. We can help organizations understand not just overall scores, but where different groups of people may be having very different experiences. And from there, we can have tailored action plans built on your data, not just on guesswork. So if you want to know where you can actually make a change within your workplace, then that's where diversity can help. But other than that, and probably about 10 minutes early, we've got some time for Q&A, but that is me. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to visit my website. I'm happy to answer some questions. If anybody has anything else they want to talk about with me one-on-one, then I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, Poggy. That was, yeah, fascinating and inspirational. And yeah, absolutely love the way that you are taking all of that experience and all of your training in engineering and applying that into this sort of completely unexpected direction and some of the fruits of that thinking. Yeah, really, really interesting to see. I'm wondering if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask. You can feel free to stick your hand up or come off mute and just ask those directly if you like, or you can pop them in the chat, either directly in the chat or privately message them to me if you would like. I mean, perhaps I could just get things started because I was really interested in what you were saying about kind of monitoring, kind of preventative monitoring, and how that could apply within workplaces within DEI. And do you have kind of an example of what sort of things that could kind of entail, or how that might be brought about?
Well, I think there's a few different things, and I think each organization is different. But again, I would say if we were to make a change in any of our workplaces to a service or a product that we were providing, then we wouldn't do it based on guesswork. We would do it based on data. We would look at what is happening, we'd look at various different pieces of information, and we would decide based on that on evidence. But when it comes to changing systems for people, that doesn't seem to happen. It seems just to be done on instinct. And I would argue that's not the best way to do things. If we are, particularly at the moment, with how much pushback there is on DEI, I would argue that we need to be doing things in an evidence-led way. We need to be able to track the impacts that we are making on workplaces, so that we can show our receipts basically, and we can only do that by collecting data. And there's different ways of doing that through your networks, through your ERGs, through micro surveys. Just simple everyday conversation with managers can help. It doesn't need to be some heroic intervention. It can be something really straightforward. Like
Yeah,
as I was
because
saying about that similarity with the condition monitoring and predictive maintenance, taking smaller bits of information more regularly can help rather than having to do one big survey a year, for example.
nice. Yeah, and it feels like that could be really powerful in countering this direct or sometimes implied argument that, DEI is kind of a waste of time or it's kind of
Exactly.
ineffectual. To actually have those receipts would be fantastic, but you don't often see that mindset applied to DEI. So that's really interesting. Liz, I noticed you've put your hand up. Thank you. Do you want to ask a question? Just dive right in.
Yes, thanks, Poggy. That's absolutely fantastic. And I can pick the analogies between kind of like science and engineering and nursing, which is my background.
Oh, that's
Um,
interesting.
yeah. Um, the thing I wanted to ask you is about how do we actually get people to stand up, speak out, and do things? Because it's one thing to know there's an issue, it's another thing to know that there might be a way to improve it, change it, undo it, rebuild it.
Mhm.
But you're still dependent, no matter how much training, how much policies, procedures, whatever you got
Yeah.
laid down, cultural awareness, you are still reliant and dependent on somebody to actually do what they should do. And whether that's in a professional capacity, an individual capacity, whether it's as part of
Mhm.
your job description, which I've noticed in the chat that somebody was saying just by doing the job properly, they were kind of like alienated for it. Um,
Yeah.
it's so hard to try and foster that ability and that confidence into people. And I don't think it's something that you can actually kind of like actively teach and embed in somebody. Then
Mhm.
that spark has still got to come from them internally for some reason. It doesn't
I
matter
would
how
agree.
much external pressure there is, that those people have got to come across a situation that makes them go, no, something
Hmm.
has to change. And I don't know how we improve that number of people, as you say, where the burden is on such a minority of people.
Sure.
How do we actually improve matters so that more people can feel enabled rather than
Mhm.
disabled to actually do things in a proactive rather than reactive manner? So thank you.
From
Yeah.
from an organization point of view, so I did a talk recently for the Nuclear Industry Professionals Conference on psychological safety, particularly, which I think covers a lot of what that question was about, really. And one of the questions that I got at the end was about how can, it was something along the lines of how can managers ensure they have a psychologically safe workplace where people can feel enabled to speak out, which is a good question. My response to that really was it senior management cannot decide that they have a psychologically safe environment. That's for employees to decide. All the senior management can do is try to put things in place so that people can at some points feel enabled to talk. But that really, that moment of when people feel it, they are able to speak out comes from them. It doesn't come from, they can't be forced to speak out. All that organizations can do is to try and put as much in place, whether that's things like anonymous reporting of incidents, for example, whether it's senior management demonstrating the types of behaviors they want other people to see in their teams. So, for example, managers admitting when they don't know something. For example, somebody saying, "I don't know," or "Can you help with this?" really can make a big difference. You know, there's this expectation that some managers have of, "Well, I'm a manager, so I have to seem to know everything." And in fact, somebody saying, "Actually, I'm not sure about this. Can you help me?" can make a big difference, and it can enable somebody else to say, "Actually, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me a bit?" Even making those small things, those small changes, can help people to speak out, to have that confidence, to be able to speak openly without the fear of retribution or of punishment, essentially for certain things. So yeah, I would say organizations can take small steps like that to try and enable people to talk more, and management leading by example, I would say, is a good way to do that.
Great. Bryony, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's not a question, more of kind of a thought process I've been following, riffing on Liz's point and what you've been saying there, Poggy. So I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about term diversity fatigue. I've never heard that, and I think it's a really interesting and needed sort of piece of language that I don't have in my brain. I think what we find a lot in my organization is we've got such a strong community feel up to a certain level. We've got all of our networks, we've got our Teams chats, we've got them for the queer community, we've got them for the BAME community, we've got them for the neurodiversity and disabled community. So we will support each other so much.
Yeah.
But then trying to get that message upstairs, and we have a few people that do tend to have more of their leadership's ear, more of that courage and conviction to be the people that stand up. But then it's that burden, that diversity fatigue of it feels like it's always me, and I feel like I need to stand up. So I feel like having that language to explain upstairs why, yes, we can have those conversations and that's great, but also it can't just be on. There has to be some kind of onus on leadership to do the learning and to do the understanding.
Absolutely.
To have that back and forward support.
And that comes into the last question as well. Actually, it was steps that employees can take is making sure that it's not just disabled people who are fighting for disabled access and visibility. It needs to be everybody. It can't just be one person. And diversity fatigue is a very, very real thing, particularly if, as in a lot of organizations, you are expected to do your ERG or networking or any add-on activities on top of being able to do your job at 100%, which other people, the people that you're working at the same level at, you've got that still 100% expectation of the job, plus the 20% on top of all of the other stuff that you do. And that's where I mean about the value. That work that you're doing is helping the organization, it's helping people stay, particularly helps with the retention and creating a more inclusive environment. And that work needs to be valued. And for it to be valued, you need it to be a part of your actual job, not, no, you need to do this at lunchtime and after 5 p.m. That is part of your core job. And that really needs to be valued and recognized in that way.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. What we just decide to value and not attach value to is such an important thing to question, isn't it? Rosie, you've got your hand up there. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about psychological safety. I am a clinical psychologist. I work in Greater Manchester Mental Health, and I put in the chat there, that I've just had a very, very difficult few years there. Experienced a lot of bullying, a lot of verbal abuse, people pointing fingers in my face and swearing and God knows what. And then, recently, somebody, who was objecting to being managed, and I'm a manager there, putting in, a grievance that means that I've been off for 3 months whilst that plays out. And like I said, that's shocked me to the core, really. I don't feel like I've had any backup, any understanding. Like I said, that the culture there is so toxic. And when I was employed, I was specifically tasked with create psychological safety. And at various points of
Just like that.
just like that. And at various points of this torturous journey, I've raised in my own supervisions, what about my psychological safety? And I've been told things like by another psychologist, well, you just need to suck it up. That's not for you. I sat in an appraisal where I was talking about the toxicity of the culture and was told, well, you've not really achieved that outcome then, have you? You've not done very well. Like you say, as if it's that easy. And I think, people talk about psychological safety as if it's something, for other people, it's not something that we need to model or be part of, or like a whole cultural concern. I just think it's so naive. It really drives me mad. So it's lovely to hear you speaking about that in such a real way. Thank you.
No, well, thank you for saying that. I do talk some. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, and you'd have a field day with my book, as a psychologist, I'm sure. But I do a lot of talking on psychological safety. And there's one thing that I didn't include in this talk, but as a way of really trying to make people understand how important psychological safety should be alongside physical safety, is there was a statistic that I was told recently, which shocks me. So imagine, different talks I asked this question. It's how many of you within the past 3 years, for example, have been on a holiday that involved getting on a plane? And that is usually most people in the audience. And then I say, imagine you're standing at the gate. You're back on when you're about to go on holiday. You're standing at the gate, ready to board your plane, and you hear this, which is a true statistic from a recent study that showed that 1 in 5 people who maintain an aircraft are in need of immediate mental health support. 1 in 5. And imagine if you'd just been about to get on the plane, and I teleported in and told you that 1 in 5 aircraft is maintained by somebody in need of immediate mental health support. How many people would still get on the aircraft? And that connection, because that with an example like that, you can see the physical connection between psychological safety and imminent danger for yourself. Mm. And that is usually a way of really getting people to understand this is something that is not just a wishy-washy, oh, we want people to feel better. It's something that can have real impacts on people. Mm. Looking at the engineering industry, but again, any kind of most industries, I would say, in some way, but particularly in engineering. Imagine if you have something like a crane operator who has issues with psychological safety. That means he's not necessarily thinking about the job he's doing there. How easily could that lead to some kind of physical injury or incident on site? It really needs. I'm glad that the dialogue is increasing on psychological safety, but we're nowhere near where we need.
That's great.
People sort of mistake, so for me, part of psychological safety is, you see, like, so in my field, like I say, I have to manage staff. So if I see an issue with somebody's practice, the way that somebody is speaking, somebody else in the team, or whatever, part of psychological safety is me being able to say, actually, that wasn't okay. Can we have a talk about that? Yeah. And, and that's what's led me to being completely isolated, and I think, people actually think it's about making people feel nice. And
No,
well,
absolutely not.
and
It's not about being
it's
comfortable.
a challenge. It's the same as, Brené Brown talks about empathy and compassion and things. You have to challenge people, so it's but
that's exactly it. It's
scared about
create
going.
I think that's exactly the point. Psychological safety is not about making people feel comfortable. It's about creating an environment where people feel able to challenge something without being fearing that they're going to get fired or that's a really, really important distinction.
Yeah, really important point. We're just at time now. We did have one question that came in whilst we were discussing to me, which I just wanted to kind of share as a final thought, even though we don't have time to answer it. Can engineers with design thinking help build stronger, more connected communities in these difficult times, not just better technology? Which I think was a really inspiring question, and really sort of speaks to the journey that you've been on, Poggy, which I'm so grateful that you've shared with us today. So thanks everyone for attending.